Hello, movie nerds, and welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, the podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the new Netflix film Damsel. This one just came out as of today as I'm recording this episode. I've sat down and given it a watch. I do have some thoughts, so we're just going to jump into it. So right out of the gate, I want to just preface my review by saying 100% I am not the target demographic for this film. I absolutely know that to be the case, so please take everything that I say with a whopping grain of salt and just know, that this was not meant for me. I'm going to try and kind of explain who I think it's meant for without hopefully insulting anyone. So let's just jump into it. So Damsel, for those of you who are not familiar, is the new fantasy film starring Millie Bobby Brown, Robin Wright. Angela Bassett is in this also, which I was not expecting. And so the gist of the film is essentially Millie Bobby Brown is a princess? ? Her father is the lord of the place where she lives. Angela Bassett is her stepmother. Her land, or where she is living, is very poor. People are freezing to death. People are starving. And so her father essentially sells her, is really kind of how this works out, sells her into a marriage in order to get gold for his people, right? And it turns out that the marriage that she's being sold into, it's kind of a trick. It's sort of a trick marriage, and she ends up being a sacrifice to a dragon. And then the whole film is kind of her escape attempt, if you will, to save herself from this dragon. There is a much more sort of convoluted story happening here, but that's the main gist of what's going on. So I think for sure Damsel is probably not going to be your cup of tea if you are perhaps over the age of 20. And 20 is being generous. I think that this is probably geared more towards Millie Bobby Brown's demographic of like 12 to 15-year-olds. And I would lean heavily towards 12 to 15-year-old girls, only because this movie leans very heavy into that I am not a damsel in distress, I don't need no man kind of a thing, right? Strong women everywhere, rawr. The movie itself, though, like if you are a parent and you want to sit down and watch this with your kids, I think it probably is a great one. If you have sort of younger or teenage kids, then this one isn't going to be so bad. I think the plausibility of the movie is what I found the most difficult to kind of wrap my brain around while watching it. So there were a couple of things about the film that I enjoyed. I enjoyed the dragon. I think that the creature creation of that, or like the design of the dragon, was really cool. I thought the way that they did sort of the dragon's fire, the fire breathing aspect of it, it sort of looked a bit like lava. It didn't behave at all really like lava, but it looked kind of like lava, which I thought was nifty. There is also a sequence, I don't know if this is spoilers, so I'm going to try and not give too much away in this, but there is also a sequence where they sort of light up this cave in a particular manner, which, though gruesome and kind of horrifying, was cool, if that makes sense in any way. I enjoyed that. But as far as like the storytelling, I think there were some pretty, for me anyway, heavy pacing issues here. There was a lot of like just nonsensical sort of script writing, like, I don't know, her being I don't know, I have a hard time kind of explaining it, because like her people are starving, and so she's introduced as this character where she's like, selfless and all of that stuff. And yet she, by the end, kind of is okay with murder. I don't know. It's very odd. And then there is this sort of moment with her and kind of her younger sister where she's talking about, her impending marriage and stuff. And she's like, oh gosh, I hope that he's, nice and generous and well-read, like very smart and all of this stuff. And then the second that she meets the prince, who is for a young dude, fairly good-looking dude, the first question, he's like, ask me anything. And the first question that she decides to ask him is, well, do you like me? It's just like this strange dichotomy of what are you going for? Like, the movie doesn't really seem like it knows what it's trying to say, if that makes sense. Like, it's definitely very heavily pushing this narrative of like women are strong and independent and, whatever. But then the minute she meets a somewhat attractive young man, she's like holding hands with him within 4 seconds. And am I pretty? Am I what you hoped for? Like that kind of thing, which doesn't necessarily give that message, very well. And a lot of this movie, I feel like, was meant to push this idea that she's like super strong and independent and whatever. But the only way that she really gets out is by like sacrificing a whole bunch of other people. And I don't know why Hollywood seems to think that the only way that women are capable of being strong is by like sacrificing all of the men around them in order to do that. It just seems a little crazy. Because when I think of, strong women who are capable of kicking butt, I think of, women like Ellen Ripley, who's trying to just save every possible person that she can. And I think of characters like from my favorite film, for instance, which I've talked about, a dozen times in various episodes, but Legend, where yes, Lily is this princess, but she's rescuing herself at the same time that Tom Cruise is rescuing her, and they sort of meet in the middle type thing, and you look at characters like Princess Leia, who could have her sort of steamy relationship with Han Solo, but still be a badass in her own right. She's breaking into Jabba's lair and all that stuff. So that's what I think of when I think of strong, independent women. It isn't the lack of something, and it isn't the inability to be vulnerable. It's just being able to stand on your own as well. And I feel like that message is sort of lost with Damsel, which is maybe why I'm not the target person for this, because I don't necessarily think that Millie Bobby Brown's character does anything particularly fancy. And a lot of the way that she sort of gets around and survives is not very plausible. Just from out of the gate, just her fall into the dragon's lair, I feel like would potentially have killed her. And if not killed her, would have definitely injured her far beyond and away the injuries that she sustains, which is a little cut to her forehead, I think. There's just some plausibility aspects there. There is some Mary Sue sort of stuff happening in this film, which does not make it enjoyable for me in particular. I could also just be, I don't know, too old for, movies of this nature. This definitely feels like something that I maybe almost would have enjoyed when I was a teenager, but it definitely sort of feels more like a CBS fantasy made for TV movie than it does like a higher budget Netflix type thing. So definitely not for me. Potentially for your teenage kids, if your teenage kids are into fantasy adventure stuff. I definitely think if you've got kids that like Millie Bobby Brown, this is probably going to be a dead ringer for them. But for me, not so much. So I would love to know what you guys thought of Damsel if you have watched this one. Subscribe if you want to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to see you in the next episode.